My name is Sue Ashone. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Northeast Regional Children's Advocacy Center. Been there for about a year. I have experience in the Child Advocacy Center world as well as the domestic violence and sexual assault world. So in running the CAC, one of the things that I did was facilitate and coordinate the case review team and the team efforts to do investigation and prosecution. I kind of coordinated those kind of things. So I did that for a long time. And the minimal facts interviewing is really key. And I think it's important we have an opportunity to talk about that today. This is for all first responders. And first responders can be anywhere, anytime when we have a child who is disclosing abuse. So we know that it's not only law enforcement, it's not only child protective services, but I actually like to get to the folks that are doing EMS, firefighters. Can you think of other first responders we should consider? Because they may be the first on the scene of something. And so we need to think about those folks. So we're going to spend a little bit of time this afternoon talking about the minimal facts interviewing. And I know that you all have a protocol here in York County that you utilize. So this may mimic in some ways what you're already doing. But again, I can't say how important and key the minimal facts is, because it is the first contact that all of you have with a kid or the non-offending family members, and maybe a perpetrator that you don't even know that's there yet. But it really determines the next steps that are taken with a kid. And your reaction, your interview with them is just incredibly important for the Child Advocacy Center to do its work, for you to get your work done in investigation, and to get children where they need to be for the services that will help you in investigation and help the child and his or her family members get the things that they need to. So let's move on to the next slide and take a look. And please, if you have questions as I'm going through this, we're a small enough group that I will certainly entertain questions. If you have comments, you may feel sometimes I'm speaking to the choir because you may have been doing this, as in this isn't new for you. But I think it's really important to ask questions and to get clarification when we need. And interestingly, clarification is one of the first things we have to do. So what I see for the folks that are first responding is that you have a primary responsibility to clarify what's going on in this initial call. You may have got a call that there's a rape, child rape, or child sexual assault, and so you're heading out to find out what's going on. Now, where might you end up doing these interviews? Tell me where you've been to do the minimal facts interview. School. That's a common place, isn't it? Kids are disclosing at school to a teacher, to a friend, to a counselor, somebody there. Other places that you've done these minimal facts interviews, or that you can imagine that they happen? Anybody done them in the child's home? Have you ever had to respond to home? That does happen on occasion as well. You know, it can be other places than the Child Advocacy Center, more than likely. You're responding to wherever it's happening. So if you'll go on to the next part of the slide. In some cases, children disclose accidentally, and sometimes it's intentional. Someone else may have witnessed the abuse. A lot of times sexual abuse is not witnessed, but that doesn't mean there aren't witnesses. And this is a time where you're going to identify the informants. Like, how did you find out about this information? You want to take time to separate the informants, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And it's a time to interview each one of them privately, and I'm going to talk more specifically about that, so you can go on to the next slide. So here we are with the informant interviews, and this is really all about child protection. We want to make sure that child victims are not present when obtaining information from the adults. So you're going to talk to the adults first. And child victims, they have ears and eyes, and they know something's going on because you just took someone privately somewhere else that they've just told about an allegation, or they know something's going on because you're the police officer, you're Child Protective Services, more than likely showing up and doing these minimal facts interviews. So children shouldn't be present, and adults invariably, and I saw it a lot in my own work, talk in front of the kids. They start telling us stuff, and the kids right there are sitting on their lap. It's like, hold it. Let's find a private space to talk. Can someone watch the child, and so that we can have some private time? So please make sure about that, and add to this slide, please. So you want to interview each informant one at a time. You don't want to take 2 adults in, or if you had a child that witnessed something that was going on as well as the adult, we won't want them in the room at the same time. You want to hear individually from each one of them. Go ahead, go on. Pick a place where you won't be overheard. So if you're in the school, is there a private place? Are they good about providing you with space in the school? Are they good? How about in home? Sometimes those walls are thin. Can you actually do a private interview there? Is it possible without somebody hearing? Because someone starts to cry, someone might get angry. Kids are going to overhear that. So we want to make sure that it's private, that it can't be overheard. Okay, let's move on. All interviews should be short and minimal and obtain essential information. We'll go on and add to that. So we need to know, what are the allegations? Why are you here? Why did you get called in? Go on. And you want simple things like, what's the name and ages of your victims? You may got called about one, but you might learn about others in the process. So you want to gather all those names and ages. Go ahead. You want to know, who is your actor? Who's your perpetrator? Who are you looking at? Who is the child disclosing about? If they disclosed about a perpetrator, it's good to know that up front. And where are they? Where's this perpetrator at? Why do you want to know where they are? Why is that important? They might actually they could be a threat, right? And so we want to make sure that they don't have access to the child, that they might shut the child down if they find out that you've been there talking with them. And they may have access to the non-offending caregiver too. And getting to them means getting to the child sometimes as well. So we want to make sure we know where they are, and we want to know if they're going to have access to this kid during the investigation. So Child Protective Services and law enforcement really want to know that, so they can look at how they're going to plan for safety for this child and protect them from regarding the testimony that they're giving you through the minimal facts. And we want to know where it happened. Why is that important? Why do we want to know where? Because we need to know about jurisdiction. I knew you knew it. Jurisdiction. It doesn't mean I want you to stop when you realize it's not in York, that it actually happened in Dauphin. I want you to keep doing the minimal facts, because you're gathering information that's brief enough that you can pass along to the correct jurisdiction to get the right folks involved. So if Child Protective Services and law enforcement are out there, they can say, okay, we've got this and we know where we want to move this to. And so we've got a jurisdictional issue. Okay. And it can also be that it's a state police case and not a local law enforcement, because of the township or the city that it happened in. So even if it happened in York, it may be that it's a different police department that happened at. Okay. So go ahead and pull all of that up. When did the alleged events occur? Boy, is this a tough one for kids. When do kids really know about time? When do they start being able to really tell time, understand how it figures out? My forensic interviewer should know. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So 4th grade, they're getting pretty good. Some don't get it in 4th grade. It's 5th grade. It's 6th grade. But really, you can't depend on kids to give you any time frame. So asking, when did this happen, could be really tough for them to answer depending on their age. So they're not really reliable about that. And that's where people start to say, oh, they're inconsistent, when they couldn't give it to you because developmentally they're not ready for that question yet. So we want you to think a little bit about that as well. So again, we're looking at 4th and 5th graders who are able to start telling time and put things in a time perspective. Go ahead, Nicole. We need to know how they're related to the perpetrator. The way the law is written now, it's not as helpful. It doesn't need to be as much for Child Protective Services because they're getting all those cases, but Child Protective Services only has certain kinds of cases they do. They don't do cases that are unrelated to the child, but they can still be part of the investigation if they choose to. But we need to know who this perpetrator is and how they're related, because that's going to make an impact on your investigation. It's an impact on the non-offending family member or family members, depending on who it was. So go ahead. And who called the police? Or who called Child Protective Services? Why is that important? Help me with that. There may be a reason why they called, and it may not always be a good reason. We don't know what the underlying cause of that will be, because we do run into cases where there is custody issues going on and trying to sort those kinds of things out with allegations. But we need to know who the informant is. Why did they call? What happened? So they can start to provide you with the initial part of your investigation on what was happening that made them call you. Why did they want your intervention? It's a really good piece of information to know and understand. Okay. And we want to know how they're related to the victim. And again, to my point that I was making about if they have a relationship with them and there's some underlying issues that we haven't uncovered yet, it may start to speak to why they called. And it could be a very good reason. This kid may have a really close relationship with the person that called you, and they're intervening on their behalf, and all for a very good reason. And so we need to understand that relationship as well. Okay. So your adult informants are going to be really helpful when you're starting to take a look at the child who is going to be your witness and victim in this case. So let's go ahead and put all of those things up there. If the child is physically injured, we got to know that right away, because if they're injured, you're not going to do more of an interview. You're actually wanting to get them treatment if there's an emergency situation. Let's get them there and we'll talk to them afterwards. Are they in danger to themselves or to other people? So I really, I know we've seen suicidal ideation in young children, but particularly if we're talking about teenagers. Unfortunately, we've seen it in 10 and 11-year-olds too, where they say, I just want to die. I can't talk about this. So we need to know from the parent if they're hearing that kind of stuff or they have concerns about it, or if there's a teenager that's really struggling and wants to hurt the other person who's done something to them, we need to know about that as well. So we really want to know about the victim's emotional state. We really want to know what kind of condition they're in before we begin to try to do a minimal facts interview. If the alleged abuse occurred one time or more than once, we would like to know that if possible, and we need to know whether it happened within 72 hours. What is our marker for 72 hours? Why is that important? 72 hours means if it was a sexual assault, we have those 3 days to find out if there's any medical evidence available. Once we get past that 3-day mark, it's less likely we're going to find any kind of evidence that there was a sexual assault. Most of our kids don't tell us right away. A lot of the times when you're going to go out on these minimal facts interviews, I believe they're going to be delayed reports. How many of you in this room have had those immediate sexual assault reports that have happened under 72 hours? Anybody in this room? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And were they sexual assaults? Okay. And was there medical evidence? You had a case of medical evidence because it was under 72. Was yours? No. Okay. Anybody else comment on whether or not you had? You're not more than likely not going to have it. There are cases that there will be, but our medical findings are less than 5%, period. And a lot of it is about delayed reporting. Even kids who have been sexually assaulted, think about your crimes code. Think about CPS laws. How many meet the criteria of sexual assault that didn't have penetration? If it was finger penetration, there's probably not going to be any physical evidence. If it was touching over or under the clothing, you're not going to have physical evidence, more than likely. at least medically. There may be other things, but not medical. So we use the 72 hours, and that's why you need to know, when did this happen? Can the adult help you figure it out? Can the child help you figure it out when you talk to them? Because if it's under 72 hours, there is an opportunity to gather that medical information, and we want every opportunity available to do that. But if the child has bathed, if the mom's washed their clothes, and it's getting rid of medical evidence. So if they brush their teeth, those kinds of things. Let's move on. So remember, and go ahead and put the whole slide up, children frequently don't disclose, until months or even years after. So I want to ask you to think about this a little bit. Why don't they? And there's an example up there of one of those reasons why. So it's mom's boyfriend who's the perpetrator. And until the perpetrator isn't around anymore, they don't feel like they can tell mom, because mom's in love with the guy and they don't want to hurt her feelings. And they may not even know that what's going on with them is wrong. What other reasons do children not tell? This is really important for us to know, why they may not give this up. They don't think they'll be believed. They might think that they're doing something wrong, that they might get in trouble. And maybe the perpetrator has said to them, no one will believe you if you tell anyway. So they decide not to tell anybody. They're afraid. They might have been also told you'll get in trouble, or the police will come get you, or CPS will take you away. And what's the likelihood that CPS might take them away? It's possible, isn't it? So that might come true. That's scary for them. And they've known other kids, possibly through their school associations, that children have gone into foster care. Why else? There's a couple of factors that really weigh. Yes. Yes, that the parent is being threatened and the child is aware of that. And so they're going to protect mom or the non-offending caregiver, so that doesn't, and nothing bad happens to them or their pets or their grandparents or friends or sisters, brothers, those kinds of things. There's this huge thing called loyalty. It's overwhelming how loyal kids will feel to the people that are abusing them. And Kim, you guys have seen this, I'm sure, when you're doing interviews, and you all have seen it too. They really, it's not that this person is bad to them all the time, but they do fun things together too, possibly. And so they may not want to tell on that parent. They may not want to get that parent in trouble. And, when we're looking at these kind of cases, it really is about people that they know, love, and trust. This is not about people that are stranger danger. We were talking at lunchtime, I was talking with one of the nurses that we taught stranger danger when we first started doing this work. How many were doing that, stranger danger stuff? Yeah, that wasn't most of the cases, really. Well, I don't know why we were doing it, but we thought we were doing a great job. Let's go out and teach stranger danger. It wasn't that. It was the people that the child was supposed to love and trust and knew that would take care of them. So loyalty is a huge factor. That's why they recant. Lots of reasons, but loyalty is one of them. When they see what happens when they tell, look, you showed up at the house for a minimal facts interview. Now I go to the CAC and they want to know more about what I was talking about. And I'm getting a medical exam for this, and meanwhile, I know someone's fighting about this in my family. I can hear it. I know what's going on. They're concerned. They're worried. I don't want people to be upset. I don't want them to think I was bad or did something wrong. So they take it back. So recantation is huge. So we need to keep that in mind as we're doing this work, to understand there's a loyalty factor that comes into play here as well. So the example of the perpetrator being mom's boyfriend isn't an unusual one, but it can be dads, it can be moms, it can be family members, it can be siblings. We don't know. Okay. So once we've assessed the need for medical attention, we need to make sure that we don't need to get that or not. So we need to take a look at that, and let's add some stuff to that. Determine whether the child needs to be taken to the ER for medical evaluation, and think about an emergency forensic interview. Now, how is it, and Kim, you'll have to help me with this, in your protocol in York, is there in the protocol about emergency forensic interviews. So can you talk just a little bit? I'm going to go over this way, so sorry I'm going out of your view.
So we do have the ability to provide that service, and we have provided that service at our center. And some of the things that we would be looking at, number one, would be safety of the child. So if there is some kind of issue that is going on that we feel it's imperative that child needs to be interviewed now to assess safety or further risk of harm to that child, that would be a situation that we could do an interview for. And then other situations, so witness to homicide, violent crimes like that, we've done those interviews immediately also.
So it's nice that you have access to that type of thing through the Children's Advocacy Center. When I was a director, we had a situation come up that made us stop and take a look at having an emergency ability to get a forensic interviewer there. We had a kid who, she was about 10 or 11 years of age, and she had disclosed sexual abuse by her father. Now, you have to know the pre-story on that, which is, so I was from Lawrence County. She came out of Erie County to her father because she had a mom that was living there who lost custody of her because she had committed physical abuse of this child, and so they placed the child with dad. She comes, and so she doesn't have her mother anymore. And I don't think they're having visits. So she's got one parent now, and she's disclosed to someone accidentally at school, because kids do that in grade school. They don't understand the ramification of when they tell someone or a friend, and someone tells the counselor, then CPS or law enforcement shows up at the door of the school, and now you're interviewing. So now she's faced with, she's already been through the CPS system. She knows what happens. She knows she got placed with her dad. Now she's told the story about her dad, and people are interested in telling about it. It's Friday afternoon, and CPS said, we're going to put her in emergency foster care for the weekend. We scheduled an interview for her on Monday. So tell me what happened on Monday when my interviewer interviewed this little girl. She didn't say a thing. She recanted. She just didn't say anything, because she knew. She went into foster care. This is it. Now I have no parents. I mean, that's what a 10 or 11-year-old is seeing and feeling. And so we decided that if we had done the interview on Friday, it was more likely we would have gotten some information from this child that would have helped to further the case, but we didn't have anything. Now, she continued to stay in foster care till things continued, but that makes a really difficult case for charging, for CPS to do an assessment. If the child isn't telling us anything, how do we do anything? We can't, and that's where keeping kids safe can become really difficult. So we employed the emergency system so that, as Kim was told us here, is that you can have access to an interviewer right away if you feel that it's necessary to do that. So that's a situation where understanding kind of the background of this kid is really helpful to know why or why not we should interview. And so take them to the emergency room for physical abuse and sexual abuse. So my question is, do we have the proper medical people at the hospital to assist you? So do you have sane Ps? Do you have docs that can look at physical abuse? And do you have protocol that tells you where these kids need to go for these kind of exams? There are communities in Pennsylvania that haven't figured this out yet. They don't have access to sane Ps, mean pediatric trained nurses who can do sexual assault exams, or they don't have docs who do the physical abuse. They have to get flown out of the county for that. But when do they send them? You know, all those kinds of things that come up. You guys have access to those kinds of things, and it's wonderful that you do. So you don't have to worry as much about who's doing those evaluations. You've got professionals specially trained to do that. Let's move on. So why emergency services? Again, we talked about if a child discloses that they've been sexually assaulted within the last 72 hours, they need that exam pronto for the possible collection of sexual assault information as well. Just make sure the child is well and safe. Let's go on to the next one. And Dr. Frazier's talking about it now, if you see bruises, if you see burns, if there's other kinds of injuries on that child, then they need emergency services then, and we may not need to do the interview any further than that if we see those injuries, and let's go on. So even if the child has said, well, this happened like 3 weeks ago, but they're saying they've got some physical symptoms, like they've got burning when they pee, there's bleeding, those types of things, we want to get an exam. And what do you think about kids getting an exam if they don't have those symptoms and it's been more than 72 hours? What do you think about that for all children getting a sexual assault exam? Let's say, and we'll talk about those particular kids because we know the physical abuse is going to get the exam. But what about sexual abuse? That always seems to be a toss-up. What do you guys think about that? Should kids have it if they aren't having symptoms and they didn't have penetration, that we need to get that medical evidence? What do you think? How many say yes, they should still get an exam? How many say no, we shouldn't really put the kids through that? And how many just don't know? Okay. It can be case by case. What the Child Advocacy Center world is saying is that all children should be offered a child sexual assault exam if that's the alleged complaint. And why is that? Because children need to know they're okay. When they are in, parents need to know that they're okay. If my kid goes through a sexual assault, or maybe my niece, my nephew, a friend of mine, and they said that they've been sexually assaulted, kids may tell us some things at the minimal facts level. They may tell us in the forensic interview some things, but they may not have told us everything yet. Some kids hold on to that information because they're not sure if they trust everybody yet or not. So it's worth having them go through the exam. It is not invasive. There is nothing that goes inside of these children, male or female. This is done in a very non-threatening way. It's done in a way that they can get pictures and information about what's going on with a child's genitalia. But it doesn't hurt them. And again, nothing goes inside of them. And it's really an opportunity for kids to know this is okay. I can get a health checkup and I know that I'm okay. Parents are relieved when they know their children are okay. And even teenagers need to know that they're okay because they have lots of worries too. The other thing that happens is that we have kids that may not disclose penetration, but they end up with genital warts or other kinds of sexually transmitted diseases. They call them STSs now. And we missed an opportunity to treat them. The parent didn't know, hasn't looked, didn't know. And so we want to make sure that there is no possibility for other kinds of collection of evidence if there is some to be found. But really, it's a psychological as much as a physical exam. And some of these kiddos, and CPS will tell you, these kids don't get an opportunity to go to the doctor. How many of your kids, CPS, don't get regular examinations? When was the last time they were to the doctor? This is a perfect opportunity to get height and weight, to see if they're normal in their development, to see if they have other kinds of issues. We had some interesting things discovered when we had kids who were examined who didn't even have a penetration issue, and it was something we could tell the pediatrician about, and the pediatrician could follow up. So you just never know what opportunities are there. So we really, the language we use is all children should be offered, and that means who's ever explaining the medical evaluation to the parent to make that decision about whether they're going to have their child examined or not, they need to understand what that exam is all about. You know, can you explain it from your own professional standpoint? Have you seen an exam? Do you know what the sane nurse is collecting or the doctor is collecting? It's really interesting stuff to see, and you'll understand why it's so important when you do. Okay, let's go on. So there may be risk of further abuse without immediate intervention, and so we want to make sure that emergency medical or an emergency forensic exam is done as well so that we don't put them at risk for other abuse. So sometimes that's another reason for emergency services, and you'll kind of gather that as you're doing your minimal facts. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this, where to get emergency services, so go ahead and put all that up. Again, you want to seek a hospital that understands your process of a multidisciplinary team. because they're a part of your team at this point. And so we want to make sure that we've got professionals who get why you're all showing up and how they might be a part of that medical evaluation and team discussion. Again, I've had emergency room docs who think they can do these exams. We had great protocol at the hospital that I worked with, and I had sane Ps that were doing the exams, and then one day, out of the blue, they decided to throw that protocol out the window, and they started doing their own exams. They don't know. There's research that shows they can't identify the genitalia of children and tell you what all those parts are. They don't know what they're looking for. They have many descriptions about what a hymen is. And if we put that into medical evidence, that just killed your case. Because it's going to get, it'll get trounced in court because they don't know what they're talking about. And defense will be able to bring in a witness to say why that doctor had no idea what they were talking about. You want trained medical experts to do it, and we need to know who's doing those kinds of things. Okay, go on. Interviewing the child. So we talked about separating the adults from the children. Now we need to separate the children from the adults. And now it's their time to talk with you. And so we really don't want the kids to be with the non-offending caregiver, and we don't know who we may not know yet who the perpetrator is. So it's important to separate the kids for that too. And we have to recognize, depending on the age of the child and their connection to the caregiver, they may not want to separate from that caregiver. It may be really traumatic for them because of all the stuff that's going on. Now, if you're going to school, there's no caregiver there, and you're able to interview them. But if the parent happens to be around, shows up at school because they know what's going on, they may not want to separate from that person. So it's something to keep in mind, and let's go on. So unfortunately, this is true. The next statement is some people are afraid of the police. Some kids are afraid of Child Protective Services because maybe the perpetrator or even the family has talked about their dislike for police, their dislike for Child Protective Services, because they have a bus that goes around and picks up children and puts them in foster care. And then you will never see mommy and daddy again. That's what you can be faced with when you go to talk to these kids. So your relationship with community policing can't be overstated. And they feel sometimes like they're going to get in trouble. A lot of victims, child victims, when I was working with them and doing therapy, they really blame themselves. 90% of the time or more, they found a way to blame themselves for what happened. I had a young gal that I worked with, and she did not disclose, talk about delay of disclosure. She was 4 and 5 when she was sexually assaulted by her 16-year-old cousin during the summer when he was the babysitter while mom and dad went to work. And she did not disclose till she was about 16 in high school. And she had a very close relationship with her gym teacher, and that's who she told. It never got reported. I didn't find, so somehow, I don't even remember now how I got involved in the case as her therapist. But she believed for a very long time, at 4 and 5 years of age, that she was responsible for what happened. And she did everything in the world she could to show that she didn't want to be around this person and no one was paying attention. But she truly believed that somehow she should have stopped this person. So in a 16-year-old's mind, if you're talking to a 16-year-old and they were telling you they were abused when they're 4 or 5, they don't remember that they're only this big when they're 4 and 5. They think they're this big when they're 4 or 5. And so they get a distortion about that. And so it's important for them to remember they were too little to fight somebody off like that. So kids do blame themselves. And so please pay attention to that as you're thinking about these kiddos. Okay, let's go on. Again, we talked about sometimes children feel that they have been threatened by the perpetrator. And it doesn't have to be something like, I'll go to jail if you tell, but they do tell them that. But it could be, I'll hurt your puppy. Like you were saying, I'll hurt your family member, or I might tell on you that you were bad. I mean, sometimes that's all it takes to get children to listen to you and not to talk, right? And certainly kids don't want to see someone go to jail because they know jail is a bad thing. And they don't want bad things to happen to people that, again, they have loyalty to. It goes back to my comments earlier, so let's go on. So remember, on calls, I really want you to make sure that you say hello to all the kids in the house. It's really important for them to hear from you on that. So kind of creating that nice atmosphere for them. When you're out on a call, this minimal fact interview should only be 5 or 10 minutes. We don't want you doing a deep interview of these kids. We want you to get the basic information, name and age, and was there an allegation. We'll go through that in a little bit. So it's only 5 or 10 minutes. The kids are separate from the family members. And if there's other children there, I would like for you to talk with them as well, because we don't know if they're possible victims too. Because if they're in that home, the likelihood that the perpetrator had access to them is great too, whether they're boys or girls, because we don't know if there's any preference yet. So we want to talk to all of those kids. They may have witnessed something and they may be a victim. I've had kids who live in the same house who witnessed things and never talked to each other about it. And they didn't talk about it till they were adults. Like, well, I knew what was going on, and I feel really guilty that I never came and helped you. That's what I heard from adults who were abused as children. So we need to remember that if you feel like you've got 2 victims in the house, you still need to interview them separately, because we don't want their stories crossing or them feeding on each other's information. You want to gather that separately. So let's go on. Child minimal facts interviews. This is just good common practice, and I just love that when I see this one about get at eye level. I had a state police officer, loved him to death. He got on the floor and played Barbies with this one kid, and it was the best thing he could have done, because she's like, this is great, someone's going to play dolls with me, and he recognizes, me at my level. And so I really appreciated that he did that. So getting at eye level, because there is a real power differential between you and kids. Physically, there's a big difference. So let's add to this. You can put them all up. If you stood up in front of me, you're taller than I am. There's a power differential there. I'm going to kind of maybe back down a little bit if you're questioning me as a police officer. If I know you're from Child Protective Services and you work with kids, and I know you might take kids, I might be afraid of that power that you have and that I've been told about. So we have to keep that power issue in mind when we're talking with kids. You want to just get them talking, put them at ease, and that might be asking them their name, where they live, and what grade they are in school. And that can be revealing. I had a 2nd grader who the police showed up. It was actually a child pornography where perpetrators aren't smart. He had all of these pictures of this 2nd grader on his iPad and then sold it at a flea market and thought he had erased it and didn't. So they don't get the award for being the brightest. And they were able to track it back to her, and because they all lived in the same house together. Funny thing. When they asked her how old she was, she knew that, but when they asked her what grade she was in, she had no idea. Wow, what are we working with? A child developmentally behind, doesn't even know what grade they are. Kids love to tell us what grade they are in school. I'm a 2nd grader. I'm a big girl. She didn't even know that. So it can be revealing about what kind of development we might be dealing with when we do minimal facts interviewing. You want to talk to them about, do they know, when you talk to the parent or the non-offending caregiver, you may want to find out what toys they like, what videos they like, what kinds of things they've done recently, so then you can talk to them about that a little bit. I know interviewers do that. It's just a way to get on the same page with the kids. And ask them, do you know why I showed up at school? Do you know why I came to your house today? Do you know why I came to visit you and talk to you? That can be really telling. And if they don't say anything, they can say, well, is there anything or any problems that you think that I need to know about? Can help to prompt getting some more information. Let's go on. Go ahead. So if the child discloses, you're done. That's a minimal facts interview. If they told you something about abuse, you don't have to go any further. Okay? So we want you to document what the child said to you. Write it down Make it a part of your record. And then let's go on. And you're going to thank them for talking with you, for telling them that they were brave, and that you are going to make arrangements for them to talk to a friend of yours that talks with children. And you may talk about the Child Advocacy Center and the person that talks to children there. And that's the end of the interview. Now, let's stop there for a minute. What do you think about that? Does that go against your instinct? Our personal curiosities? It does, doesn't it? We want to know more. Why don't we go beyond this? Why is minimal facts so important? Yes. Okay, so one is about we don't want them to have to tell the story more than one time, because that could be, what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of trauma kids go through, and when we have to tell those kinds of things, it's stressful on them. So we want to reduce the amount of stress or trauma that's happening to them. Why else do we stop there and not do the in-depth interview in the field? Your forensic interviewers will tell you. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
You may be talking to them in the actual place. Or
Here, I'm going to have you speak into that.
you may be talking to the child in the actual place where the incident occurred.
Yes.
And that's very traumatic for them to be able to talk to you about what happened when it happened right there.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. So if you're in their home and the abuse happened there, that could be really uncomfortable. They're telling secrets about what happened in their house. What do you guys know about child development? How do we ask questions of 4-year-olds versus 14-year-olds? Yes. Here, I'm going to let you talk into this. Sorry.
It's okay. When I've seen the interviews take place, they typically go through a standard form where they have the child explain the development and the body parts. Of course, that's all recorded, so that's all good too. But it's, they get their development or their understanding of the development, and then that'll lead or proceed into questions about if any of those body parts were touched and that type of thing. So it kind of lines up the child's knowledge, their education or whatever about their own body, and then things that are relative to the incident that occurred to them.
Well said, thank you. So we have an opportunity for professionals, and not saying that you're not professionals, but they're trained interviewers who know how to ask questions, that they're not leading, they're going to be defensible in court, they are developmentally appropriate, and they're safe. They're in a safe place, and I'm glad that you said that safety is an issue for kids. They have to feel like they're in a child-friendly place where they can talk about this stuff. Now, all kids don't talk at the interview. I had attorneys who thought that every child who came through the center, they all said that they were abused, and we believe, and they were all believed, and all these cases went to court. Maybe 50% of them, Kim, what would you say? Maybe? Or just believability? Probably about 50% of the cases. Some of the kids don't talk. Some of them, just aren't ready. Some of them, we thought they were verbal enough, and they're 3, and it didn't happen, Or they just come in and say, nope, just didn't happen. So not all cases that come to the CAC might be abuse. I mean, we figure that out. So the minimal facts sets it up for the child advocacy centers to put their personnel into place to help you. What we ran into in the field was that as soon as I could get, because we did joint interviews for a long time, CPS and law enforcement went in the room together, and they did the in-depth interview, and they decided who was going to do that. But once I got those folks trained, then they left. And then I didn't have trained people again. And to try to keep enough people trained on how to do it and understand the necessity of the legally sound non-leading and the development of children, keeping that in mind, was huge. And so the field really went to forensic interviewing, where we had specially trained people. Now, the first interviewer I hired, and she's still there, was a state trooper. I loved her. She was great at investigations. She did a lot of our child cases. In fact, I kind of converted her to the Child Advocacy Center movement after I took her to a training that was being done in San Diego. She went to the Child Maltreatment Conference, and she came away from that saying, all right, I know we haven't been doing a very good job at this. I think I'm going to go back and tell my corporal I should be doing these investigations because I'm understanding how and why things need to be done. And she went back and she took on all of those cases. Then she retired, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're losing her. And so I said, would you come work for me part-time and be a forensic interviewer? And she was really happy to do that. But I had to send her to training. The same training that any forensic interviewer has to go to, police officers have to too, because there is a method and a purpose for the way that those interviews are done. It's not like doing a perp interview. CPS, it's not the same as interviewing for other kinds of things. They're really, because you're looking at the legal and the developmental challenges of that we're looking at professionals doing that. So I always like to talk about that piece because it's really important that we don't do them in the field, because you could head down a road and follow and have no protocol you're following when it comes to interviewing, and the legal system knowing that there's a certain way that we do them and information gets delivered, and it's been researched to show that it's the best way to do it, that we're going to continue doing that. And we need the buy-in of all of our professionals who may end up interviewing a child. It may even happen in a therapist office, and they need to understand when they stop, because a child has been in treatment and then, they disclose abuse. We don't want them going into detail as well, and so teaching them as well is important. So let's go on. If a child doesn't disclose, you're going to thank them for letting you talk with them, and you're going to stop the interview. Done. If they're not going to tell you, they're not going to tell you. So let's keep going with that. Please don't feel pressured to get the allegation and the disclosure confirmed. They just may not be ready, and there may not be any abuse. Could be either scenario. Keep going. So we want to avoid any forcing, pressuring, cajoling, and getting them to tell us what happened. Again, we've seen that gets into leading and all kinds of things. It's going to take it down a bad road, and it's going to be a terrible case, and it won't go to prosecution. And it may end up screwing up Child Protective Services case too. So let's keep going with that. And we used to have people that bribe children. We'll get some ice cream. I've got some stickers. I've got a teddy bear for you. If you just tell me what happened, I promise I won't tell anybody else. Well, we can't do that. And we can't bribe children, so let's keep going. Thank the child for talking with, did I already do this one? Yes, the last one is leading questions. I didn't see it change. Leading questions takes you down a road of getting into trouble, because if you start putting words in that child's mouth, well, didn't he touch your butt? Uh-oh, we just interjected something that they haven't even said. But you heard that's what happened from the adult, but the child hasn't told you that. We can't be saying things that someone else has said to them. So no leading questions, and going on. So emergency responders should not interview children in detail, because, let's just go through this, we can inadvertently contaminate a child's disclosure. As well-meaning as any of you could be, in that you could contaminate it. And some children, depending on their age, may really want to cooperate with you and please you, and they'll say yes to things just to make you happy. They do that. It's a developmental thing that happens with kids. And remember that there's this huge differential physically and emotionally, and even if it's false, they might tell you and agree with you with your leading questions. So we don't want to take them down that road. Okay. Let's go on. So what we want you to do is to arrange for a scheduled forensic interview at a child advocacy center. You got the disclosure, and you're going to tell the child about the next steps, and you're going to inform the parents about the next steps. It doesn't mean that it's, more than that or less than that, but we want our interview experts to now provide you with an opportunity to look at an in-depth interview. And that's why I have to say at this point, you need to be present at the interviews. You can't depend on the recording. Why do I say that? I've heard this from a lot of folks. Oh, just send me the DVD, I'll look at it later. Why don't we want to do that? Why do child advocacy centers really, why is that promoted that both investigative bodies need to be there? Because there may be stuff that comes out in the interview that you could be thinking about, oh, I want to ask Kim more. Can she ask more about this? This has taken me down another road. You're her eyes and ears. You're seeing and hearing things that may suggest to you that I've got to have another question asked, and can she? So when she comes out and takes a break, because you don't use earbuds, right? So she's going to take a break. She's going to come out and say, okay, my law enforcement and child protective services, what did I miss? What would you like me to ask? Did you hear something that we should follow up on? And it's your opportunity to say, hey, I heard this, I heard that. Can you get this clarified for me? I want to know more about that information that the child started to talk about, because I'm thinking there might be evidence there, and can you go a little bit further with that? So you have an opportunity to interact with your interviewer live and get that information, and it's going to put you in a much better investigative posture to move forward on that case if you have an opportunity to do that, or you see that it's just not worth that. Okay, we don't really have anything. Question. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Because the interviewer is really intense on a lot of things. They can't see everything. They don't hear everything, as much as we want to say that we do. So yes, you can watch body language. You can see a change in them when she starts to close in on certain things during the interview. Happy-go-lucky kid going along, answering questions, and maybe drawing on a piece of paper, and then things start to tighten up a little bit, and we're getting close to talking about the situation, and the body language changes. I've seen kids get up and run around the room. I've seen them go from happy to their face just sinks. The gamut of things. You see the body language change. So I appreciate you saying that. Absolutely. So you get to witness that as well. Why else do we want you both at the interview? Thank you. If you didn't hear, just go ahead.
Just the team building aspect of it. So when the interview is done, we want law enforcement and children and youth to be talking about what they're both jointly going to be doing next in their investigation. Sometimes we have folks planning when they're going to go out and do the suspect interviews and different things like that.
Yeah, because the last thing that law enforcement wants is the perpetrator having a heads up. And CPS sometimes has to give that heads up. And so can they delay that while you're trying to get your perp interview? Because now you've had enough information from this forensic interview with this kid that you started making your plans for this investigation. So we want that teamwork happening at that moment, so that you know who's doing what and when you're going to do what, and there's planning for safety around this kid. Okay, so it's important for that fact. While all of that's happening, the Child Advocacy Center is talking to the non-offending caregiver. You need the non-offending caregiver. You need them on your side. And the Advocacy Center, whether they provide it or whether they have an agreement with the victim services to come in and work with that family, the family has a ton of questions. And they want their ear on the door listening to that interview. And we want them talking to a victim advocate, a family advocate, so they get their questions answered, that they understand that there may be something that's happened and we need to support this child with whatever happens. And so getting them involved in that process, you're going to have a better outcome of your case if we can get the non-offending caregiver in place as well. And that's a huge, huge thing. So it's not only for the interview, it's for the entire family that's supposed to be supporting this kid. Because what do we see in these kind of cases? It's family or closely related to the family, and fractures in that family happen. And if families don't feel like they're being supported, They're going to ask the kid to shut up in all kinds of different ways about what's happening, and they're going to recant, and you're not going to get cooperation in the case, and it can go south pretty quickly. All right, let's go on. So what not to do? Please don't make a child write a statement. I've had law enforcement officers, where was I recently? I must have been up, I'm trying to think, it was Vermont or New Hampshire. We were talking, and one of the police officers said they had the child write down a statement, and I almost crumbled and went under the table. Why don't we want a written statement? Why would I be so opposed? Why would anybody be so opposed to that? Oh gosh, if it's written down and their interview was different, we got problems, right? So please don't make them write a statement down. Let's go on. Don't polygraph the child or threaten to do so. So when I hear child, I think young. I'm talking about teenagers. I had 2 girls who witnessed some horrendous things as well as were sexually abused by their father. And both of them were a mess when they came in to do interviews. And not only was there abuse going on, but they had also witnessed a homicide. So we had 2 things going on with those girls. And the state trooper was really on board with me about not polygraphing the victim, but their supervisor was not on board about that. And I had a district attorney at that time that said, well, we should probably do a polygraph just to make sure if we're going to invest resources in this and see if we can find a body, and I can't tell you all the complications of the case, then we really should have a polygraph. And I was dying, and we were having this argument at our team meeting. We don't polygraph victims, period, because that reinforces their thought that they are to blame, that there's something wrong with them, that this happened to them. You either decide you're in or you decide you're not. And with the the Violence Against Women Act that went into, was that in the 90s? That was the 90s that the Violence Against Women Act money came through federally. Part of that money attached to it said you can't polygraph victims. That includes our teenagers. Yes, we need to take a look at the possibility that they're more susceptible to lying to us than others, but I can tell you in general, research shows that they're as likely to lie as people lie about robberies, burglaries, and other kinds of things. That doesn't happen. Their stories will fall apart pretty quickly. Good forensic interview, good investigation will show that to be so. We don't need to polygraph them to prove that. So please don't do that. Go ahead. So we don't want to offer rewards. So when we do child advocacy centers, a lot of times we have little gift bags and teddy bears. Some have stopped doing that. But what we want to pay attention to is it's not you as law enforcement, you as protective services, or even the forensic interviewer giving the child anything after the interview, whether it be the minimal facts interview, whether it be the forensic interview at the CAC. We don't want them to connect with, I was good, I get a prize for telling. We just don't want that kind of communication. So please, we avoid that. But, I've heard in old days, people offering, we'll get some ice cream afterwards, we'll go to the cafeteria, we'll get some things to eat. We can't promise those kinds of things in order to get the disclosure, so we don't offer rewards. Don't ask the child to pretend or imagine. Oh boy. So we don't want them to think outside of the reality, because what does that do? We got pretend information now? That's not going to help us at all. So we don't want them to fantasize in any way about what they think might have happened. Doesn't take us down a good road at all. Next. Okay, don't touch or hold the child in any way. And unfortunately, I have to say this because I've had people say, just sit up on my lap here and tell me all about it. Can't do that. You've just invaded their space. You got a sexual assault victim or a physical abuse victim whose space has been invaded horribly, whether through physical or sexual assault, and we're going to touch them. No, we can't do that. So we need to pay attention that it was our need to hold the child, not the child's need for us to do that. So we have to pay attention that we wanted to comfort them, make them feel better, make it easier to talk about. That doesn't do it. We don't understand the impact that has on a child when they've had no permission for someone to touch them. It's been taken away from them in the assaults that have happened to them, and we don't want to go along that same, if I should say, like Shay was talking before, that parallel process of power over a child. We absolutely demonstrate power when we do those kinds of things with kids. And I have to watch that myself, even touching a victim on the shoulder. We don't know in what ways the abuse happened initially, so touching them anywhere, even if we think it's benign, can be imposing on their body. Okay. So I talked about sitting on the lap. Go ahead. And don't promise them that they'll never, ever, ever have to see the perpetrator again or anything like that, because there's no way you can guarantee that. So don't make promises that you can't keep. So we'll keep going. Though we want to say that stuff, right? We want to protect them. The suggestiveness occurs when when an interviewer introduces new information about the topic. So don't bring new information and stick with what you know, what the child has told you. Go ahead. As I said earlier, did he touch your bottom? Let's keep going. We don't want to put influence on them, like social pressure, and you can add to the rest of the slide. Suppose this happened in a daycare, and you said, oh, and this, other kids in your class told me this happened to them. Tell me what happened to you. So there's a pressure that, oh, I've got to say something because the other kids in the class said something. And that's where they're thinking from. Developmentally, that's what our kids are thinking. Creating an obedience to authority. I think some bad things happened to you. Now, why don't you just tell me about them? So you're making a lot of assumptions there. Can't make assumptions when you're interviewing and investigating like that. And we don't want to talk about the perpetrator in negative terms. As much as we might hate the person or are disgusted with what they've done, we can't show that in the interview because we don't know how the child feels about this person. They may have a lot of respect, love, loyalty, and if we talk about like that, that puts you at odds with them because they're thinking, this person really doesn't like my dad, doesn't like my grandpa, hates my grandmother, so I'm not going to tell anything because I think they're okay, and you're telling me you like to see them go to jail, they're a bad person. So those are some things to keep in mind when we're talking to kids. Okay, let's go on. You can put them all up. So, reinforcement. Again, we talked about not offering stickers and food, and though kids do get food at the center, you're not the one giving it. They might be starved when they come in, and they're not going to be able to do an interview, but that's at the CAC. Out in the field, doing the minimal facts interview, we're not bringing in McDonald's. We're not bringing stickers. Okay? We don't want you guys doing that. We don't give praise for telling. You can thank them for being courageous and brave for telling today. We don't want to criticize a child when they make statements and suggest that they made it up, that they're lying to you, that it just wasn't good enough. We don't want to limit a child's mobility. So think about when you go in the room to do this minimal facts interview. Who's closest to the door? Do they have access to get out if they want to? Now, when you're interviewing perps, we sit in front of the door, right? Yes? No? What do? You like them access to the door, or do you like to kind of have control of the door? I don't know. It depends on who you're interviewing. So you make that decision. When you're thinking about children and interviewing them, this minimal facts interview, you should be sitting in front of the door. You're in a private space, you've made it quiet, but they need to know they can get out. Don't lock the door unless they know that the door is the kind that you can just open it anyway. So I would reassure clients that I was working with when I locked the door so people wouldn't come in and disturb us, but you always have the ability to get out. This does not keep you from leaving the room. So make sure that they feel like they're mobile, that you're not making them sit in the chair and they can't move and they have to talk to you. If you were a hyperactive kid, you know how hard that is to sit? And if you've been traumatized, you may look like a hyperactive kid and run around and be crazy and all that good stuff. So we can't make them sit. We can't make them do those kinds of things, because then, again, there's an exertion of power in that situation. And again, we don't want to interrogate them. It's not an interrogation. This is about eliciting some information. Let's go on. So, again, this is the fantasy thing. Don't take them out of direct experience. We don't want them to be SpongeBob SquarePants and fantasize about something. We want to know really what happened. So go on. So then we want to make sure about safety, that, and talk to the non-offending caregiver about that, because your concern might be they may not keep them safe. Do they believe this person? Because between the minimal facts interview and the CAC interview, there's some time. It might be a day, it might be 2 days, it might be a weekend. What is your safety assessment of this situation? So what do you understand about where the suspect is, and who it is, and what makes you have concern or not? So you've got to assess. So what we really want here, law enforcement and Child Protective Services, to work together on the issue of safety assessment and involve each other in it, so that you each know what the plan is for safety for this child based on the minimal facts. You're talking to each other, even at that point, even before you get to the CAC, and saying, okay, I've got this kid, I've done a minimal facts interview, and maybe CPS was with you, maybe law enforcement was with you, and I love that you arrived together and did that. But if you're not, you've got to be telling the other party what you've got and how are we going to protect this child, and get the non-offending caregiver on board. If there are great concerns about that, then there has to be some other things put in place to protect them, so that that interview can be done without the corruption by the non-offending caregiver. Okay, go on. So the next steps, we're going to talk to the non-offending caregiver. We want to really not ask the child any more information, and we want to explain to the caregiver about the CAC referral. We want them to know the next step so they understand what's happening next, because this is new to them. This isn't new to you. If you've been in the field and doing this, you get it. You know what's happening. They have not a clue. Would your family members know, your own family members know the process of child abuse investigation, starting with minimal facts interviewing? No. So if you were supporting them, you'd want to know, okay, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. That's exactly what every non-offending caregiver needs to know, and every child needs to know. These are the next steps, and these are the things we want to have happen, including the medical exam. Go on. All right. So why do we talk about all this? Because of kiddos, right? Kids are counting on us to do it right. And we figured out that the right way to do these things is to start with a great minimal facts interview. You may, even if a child doesn't disclose to you after that interview, your gut might tell you, boy, there's just something not okay here. Do we do a forensic interview? You could. You could still take the opportunity with the allegations that brought you to the school, that brought you to the home, that brought you to wherever, and say, you know, I just don't like what I'm hearing and seeing and feeling. I really want to refer this to you guys. Let them have a shot at it. Let them try and be there for the interview. That is actually expected now through the standards of accreditation for child advocacy centers, that law enforcement and Child Protective Services are there for the interview, because you can't do your work unless you're there live with it happening. I know there are times when it's impossible, but that should be the rarity, not the usual way of operation. All right. Do you guys, you all have a copy of the protocols? You have kind of like a car card there. Anything new, different questions that you want to ask about what's on that card? It's a great handy thing to have. I know in Allegheny County, they started this a long time ago. They called it the cop card. It's just a quick and dirty on how to do a minimal facts interview, what to pay attention to, what not to do, and gives great information about that. But the protocol is a part, this minimal facts protocol is a part of what the Child Advocacy Center does. It's part of the bigger protocol about investigation and treatment and prosecution. So, questions, comments, thoughts? Yes? put it out there for everybody.
So I was just wondering if there was any way, if I gave you a scenario, if you could show us how you would begin an interview with a child, like let's say you show up at a school or home. Because I got one today, and I think the hardest thing is how you start.
Yeah.
So, and I missed the beginning of 5-10 minutes, so I'd love to.
Yeah, if you look back in, if we go back to the very beginning, we really want you to make the situation at ease, and that's by saying hello to the child, and making it, just getting into some chit chat, some really easy conversation. I don't know how your conversation started today, but it can be just asking some questions, and it can also be about, do you know why I came here today? Go ahead. Okay. And so did mom tell her daughter why you were coming? Okay, so that's information you want to gather ahead of time. Talk to the adult informants first and find out from them why they called you, what's going on, what made them suspect something was going on, and why they called. That's going to give you a better lay of the land of how you want to move into talking with the child then. So you can say, Mom called me today. She was concerned. Can you tell me about why she's concerned? And mm-hmm. Nothing. Okay. So if you're not getting anything, the child is pretty reticent and just isn't ready. They don't even know what's going on. They're just shocked by all of this. Sometimes what I've suggested, if you really have some strong feelings about it, you could refer to the CAC. You might also talk to the CAC about maybe we need to do a little assessment of things going on, so they might be able to go into some counseling or therapy, some prevention education stuff that might end up eliciting some information. But if there's a concern, we want to prevent if there is something possibly going on. There might be some grooming going on that's concerning, but there hasn't been any action yet. And so sometimes there are prevention education opportunities for kids to learn about how to keep their body safe, and getting them into things like that and making it a short-term experience for them builds in that idea of, okay, keeping my body safe means so that if something is happening or might happen, that they're aware and that prevention can happen. So sometimes it is a prevention opportunity as opposed to an intervention. And so we don't know. The age of the child is important. Are they, all of those things come into mind. But if we're really struggling, I always encourage people, if you don't know for sure, and it's who do you bounce these things off of? I used to have police officers and CPS call, or I'd call them and say, okay, this is the referral that came in. What do you think about it? Should we do this interview? You want to go out and do a minimal fax, because they had just called in with something, thinking they were calling the child line maybe instead of. So it would be my job to kind of start to coordinate and talk to people. But as a therapist, I used to bounce stuff off people all the time as well. So we don't want to interject anything and so I think you were right just to close it, because you really didn't have a whole lot. But there are other opportunities, and one of those is prevention. So we don't want to miss that. So the CAC hopefully will have some resources for you about who might do some prevention ed with kids, who has a little program that they do, or maybe there's a counselor or therapist that would do some prevention education just to put that in place in case that concern is real. Can you tell me why there was a reason Mom was really concerned about Grandma's boyfriend?
I think
Interview in the hallway. How private is that? And what am I going to say in the hallway? Oh, oh. So do you see how this happens? Even when we think we've got good stuff, things still don't happen in a way that's really helpful for children. So she's not going to make any disclosure there. And so referral to the pediatrician might be helpful because that child may have a better relationship with the pediatrician and can talk about the signs and symptoms that are going on as opposed to taking it to an emergency facility. So that's always something to think about too, because who has a better history? Should be the pediatrician. Pardon me? Yeah.
So the general rule for York County's protocol is we would send to the hospital if the last known contact with the alleged perpetrator was within 5 days. So we use a 5-day rule for evidence collection. Outside of that, she can be referred, even if it's just exam only, to the CAC. Same nurses would. For the exam, the medical. And that way she meets with the same, it would be this sexual assault forensic team. They are going to do their minimal interview. And that's an education piece for medical providers, for us as well, when to stop questioning kids and where to do that. But she'll meet with the nurses that we work with and be able to be interviewed in a more private manner. And if a CAC interview comes out of that, then, that opportunity's there.
So there is other intervention, there's prevention. An intervention like a nurse might help too, because kids will sometimes talk to the doctors and nurses before they'll talk to police or CPS, right? There's a different kind of situation there. So it's great to know that you guys will do that. So know that you have that referral right here. So CAC can be your first call for around all these things, and they can direct you to what your next steps might be and what can I do for this family. This is where I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. These case scenarios come up all the time. So what I was going to say when you initially made me think, we can't do this work in isolation. You have a team of people here in York County that are at your disposal. They're Child Protective Services, they're law enforcement, they're victim advocates, your Child Advocacy Center, your mental health therapists, your medical teams. So don't try to make these decisions on your own. That's why we emphasize teamwork, whether it be at the interview, whether it be after the interview, like you've just described. It's a great question. I'm glad you posed that. But making them in isolation you just might miss an opportunity for a prevention or an intervention that would have been really, really helpful. So bounce that off of your colleagues. I think that Shay may have said this morning. Who's in your speed dial? Who can you call when you need to bounce something off of somebody? Is the CAC in your speed dial? Do you have a CPS worker that you always call because you have faith in them? Do you have a law enforcement officer you can call, even if they're not your jurisdiction, say, hey, I got this. I have no idea what the next step is. But your CAC is a great referral around all of these types of things, and they can talk you through that kind of stuff. We serve as resource to our multidisciplinary team and get you hooked up with the right people. Yeah, thank you for helping with that. Other thoughts, questions, concerns? Yes.
The age cutoff range for CRC.
This is the Child Resource Center in Harrisburg.
In Harrisburg. Now, doesn't pertain to, what age they'll do. However, we had a 14-year-old victim who, very intelligent. She knew everything that was going on. My supervisor wanted us to interview her, and I was pushing back on that. Said, even though she is at this, intellectual age, I'd rather have them do it. Because I'd like to, garnish that neutral party to get this information that I can then use. But he was insistent that we should do it because of her intellect. So is there any type of cutoff age where once it goes through the referral process to get them over there, does that factor in to the interviewer by any means?
So it's a good question. Every county decides through its protocol what age kids they're going to interview. So getting kids before 3 is the verbal skills generally aren't there. Even if they're really verbal at 2.5, it's hard to get them qualified as a witness in a case. But it's worth seeing what's going on because you might be able to provide other information. So you can make decisions about that. But I've seen particularly 3 to 18, but I see centers that stop at 13 and 14. I can tell you from my own experience, I mean, so if are you from Harrisburg or York? Okay. So, an agreement with your center is, I mean, if the protocol says in your county that you're seeing them up to 18, then that's what you do. Even if, and supervisors have to buy into that. And there's a reason for that. Even though they're 14 and they seem really intelligent, teenage mentality, developmental level is still in question. And it's really important for an interviewer who's been trained in that to give you the most you can get out of the interview. So it's an opportunity for the skilled interviewer to do it. Even though they're very verbal and very intelligent and all of that, there's still that opportunity to get them on the recording and to ask the questions. And you may hear things that you want to ask further about. CPS may as well. But the other thing is that you've got a parent who has come with them more than likely to the interview, and you still get that whole circle of services that's important, whether they're 4 or whether they're 14. So we start to think that, kids can handle stuff when they're older, or that we can interview them when they're older. And I just think that we don't want to fall into that trap. That I really believe since we're dealing with all kids, I think we see them up to 18. In fact, there are some centers who will do developmentally disabled adults because their emotional mentality, their developmental level is like a kid or a teenager. And so their services are perfect for that too. So I just don't want to miss out on those opportunities, because if you interview them, and maybe let's say it's at her house or it's at the station, did mom get to talk to a victim advocate? Did we get to talk about whether we need medical? Did we get to talk about mental health treatment? I mean, the team didn't get to be a part of that. And to take a look at those kinds of services where they hear about that when you take it to the center. So I would side with you and push back to my supervisor as well. But you need to use your protocol and say, look, everybody signed off on this. It doesn't matter how intellectual or not. All of the kids up to age 18 are going to the center for a forensic interview. So know what your protocol says. And if you truly believe if the protocol says up to 14 and you have a supervisor who said, oh, they've made the cutoff, we're good, you do the interview, you can, you may want to advocate within your own county to say, hey, we want them up to 18 and this is why. And have your forensic interviewer prepare that. They've got access to research and information that will help you make that happen, if possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'm sure they, tweak their interviews for it.
Absolutely. I mean, they are skilled to do 3 to 18. So depending on who walks through the door, it's how they ask the questions. Because you can't ask the 4-year-old the same kind of questions you ask a 14. You might be a little more direct with the 14-year-old than you will be with the 4-year-old because they're developmentally so different. But that's their skill level, and that's why you use them, and that's why we need them, because they understand those other levels of development. Just because teenagers are smart doesn't mean that all the decision-making happens right here is done completing it, because this decision-making area has a ways to go yet. So, we need to talk with them and figure out, and how do we keep them safe, right, if they're making some bad judgments or getting into situations. And what about the human trafficking stuff we saw come through this morning? Do we want to do those interviews ourselves, or would we like some help with that? The federal government has forensic interviewers, and certainly CACs can do those interviews too. So that's something each county has to decide how far they take that protocol and, what areas you're working on. So thanks for the question. That was good. Great question so far. Anything else that you want to know about? Want to ask your interviewers about, the CAC about? All right. So this is the very beginning of the case. And you're protecting the case by doing minimal facts. And that's really what we want to have happen. And you're not always going to do it well or right, but own up to that and talk to the CAC and say, oh, I think I messed this one up. What should I have done differently? How can I do this better next time? That's how we learn. And hopefully you have that trust and respect for each other as colleagues to be able to say those kinds of things to each other. And when we own those kind of things, we're only going to do better for the kids. And that's really what it's all about, is making every opportunity that we can make available for kids to be able to tell their story. And it may not happen the first time, but the way you set it up and the way you react will maybe make it possible the next time you get that call for that kid. Because they're just not always ready right away. Just like your kiddo. She may not be ready. There may not be anything. We don't know. But we want to make it an opportunity that they'll revisit if they need to. And that's really what, is important, that we create safety in that environment. So.